The Dyatlov Pass Incident, Russia's deadliest unsolved mystery, February 2, 1959. The Ural Mountains, Soviet Russia. 9 experienced hikers are found dead in the snow under circumstances so bizarre that investigators still can't explain what happened 67 years later. This is the story of the Dyatlov Pass Incident, one of history's most disturbing unsolved mysteries. The expedition. In late January 1959, 10 students from Ural Polytechnical Institute set out on a skiing expedition to Otterton Mountain in the northern Urals. The group was led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, an experienced hiker and engineer. All members were Grade 2-3 certified hikers. This wasn't their first rodeo. The plan was simple: a 3-week trek through the mountains covering over 300 kilometers. They were equipped with everything they needed: tents, warm clothing, food supplies, cameras, and journals to document the journey. One member, Yuri Yudin, turned back on January 28th due to illness. He would be the only survivor. The other 9 continued toward their destination, the last known contact. On February 1st, the group reached the edge of a highland area and began preparing to climb. They cached surplus food and equipment to pick up on their return journey. That evening, they camped on the slopes of Kholat Syakhl, a name that translates from the indigenous Mansi language as Dead Mountain. This would be their last night alive. When the group failed to return by their expected date of February 12th, no immediate search was launched. It wasn't until February 20th, when worried families pressured the college, that a search party was organized. What they found on February 26th would haunt them forever. The tent was discovered first, half-torn and abandoned on the mountain slope. But here's where it gets strange. The tent had been cut open from the inside. Someone, or all of them, had slashed their way out in a panic and fled into the 30-degree-C night, wearing only underwear and socks. Footprints in the snow showed they had walked, not run, toward the forest. Some were barefoot, some were in socks. Nobody had stopped to put on boots or proper clothing. The bodies. The first 2 bodies were found under a large cedar tree about 1.5 kilometers from the tent. They were barefoot and dressed only in underwear. Between the tent and the cedar tree, 3 more bodies were found: Dyatlov himself and 2 others. They appeared to have died trying to return to the tent. These 5 deaths could maybe be explained by hypothermia, except for one detail. Branches on the cedar tree were broken up to 5 meters high, as if someone had climbed it desperately to see something in the distance or escape something on the ground. But the real horror was still buried under the snow. The final 4. It took another 2 months to find the last 4 bodies. They were discovered in a ravine, buried under 4 meters of snow, and their condition was disturbing. Lyudmila Dubinina was missing her tongue, eyes, and part of her lips and facial tissue. Alexander Zolotaryov was missing his eyes. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol had major skull damage. All 4 had severe internal injuries, broken ribs, fractured skulls, but almost no external wounds. The medical examiner described their injuries as consistent with a car crash or serious impact, stating, "It was not possible for a human to cause such damage." Even stranger, their clothing was contaminated with abnormally high levels of radiation. Soviet authorities launched an official investigation. The lead investigator was Lev Ivanov, an experienced prosecutor. His final report concluded, the cause of death was an unknown compelling force which the hikers were unable to overcome. Then, the case was abruptly closed. All files were classified. Ivanov was ordered to destroy evidence and never speak of it again. Decades later, before his death, Ivanov admitted, "I suspected at the time, and am almost sure now, that these bright flying spheres had a direct connection to the group's death." Theories. Over the decades, dozens of theories have emerged. 1. Avalanche theory. In 2019, Swiss researchers claimed a small avalanche could explain the injuries and panic, but critics point out the tent was found intact and still anchored. An avalanche strong enough to cause those injuries would have buried everything. 2. Infrasound panic. Some scientists suggest wind patterns created infrasound, low-frequency sound waves that cause panic, dread, and irrational behavior in humans. This could explain why they fled the tent in terror. 3. Military accident. The area was near a Soviet military testing site. Some believe the hikers stumbled onto a weapons test, possibly a parachute mine or thermobaric weapon, explaining the radiation and massive internal injuries without external damage. 4. Paradoxical undressing. Hypothermia can cause paradoxical undressing. Victims feel burning hot and strip off clothes before freezing to death. But this doesn't explain the injuries, the radiation, or why they cut the tent from inside. 5. Yeti or wild animal. The Mansi people warned Dyatlov about the area, saying it was forbidden and dangerous. Some think a bear or unknown creature attacked, but animals don't explain the radiation or why experienced hikers would flee their only shelter. The truth. In 2019, the Russian government reopened the case. In 2020, they officially declared death by avalanche, but they admitted they couldn't explain all the evidence. In 2021, a scientific journal published a study supporting the avalanche theory. But once again, critics tore it apart for ignoring key evidence like the radiation and missing body parts. Here's what we know for certain. 9 experienced hikers fled their tent in terror during a blizzard. They walked calmly at first, then scattered in panic. 5 died of hypothermia trying to return to safety. 4 died from massive internal trauma that shouldn't be possible from a fall or hypothermia. Their clothing was radioactive. Soviet authorities covered it up. The lesson. The Dyatlov Pass Incident reminds us that even in 2026, with all our technology and science, some mysteries refuse to be solved. 9 people died on that mountain, and we may never know why. The site is now marked with a memorial plaque. The pass itself was renamed Dyatlov Pass in honor of the group's leader. Whatever happened on Dead Mountain that night, it was terrifying enough to make 9 rational, experienced hikers choose to die slowly in the snow rather than stay in their tent. And that might be the scariest part of all.